The most important thing you can do as a filmmaker or producer is fundamentally to create content that people are actually going to want to watch. And you can have the best camera in the world, but if you can't direct your talent or you can't tell a good story, no one's going to watch it. Then what's the point of having a good year?
Hi, and welcome to the Your Story Studios podcast, the podcast where we sit down with content creators and hear their story. Today, we are joined by a man that needs absolutely no introduction.
Who's that?
That's you.
Oh, hi everybody.
For those that don't know who you are, who are you?
So my name's Campbell. I'm a video producer for 77 Productions. Been in the industry over 15 years now, doing various different bits and pieces across a broad range of both live and post-production for video work. 77 Productions is a full-service production agency doing animation, 2D, 3D and live production as well.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's just go. So that's where you are today. Let's go back 15 years or so. How did you start creating video content? You tell us your story, Campbell.
Oh, rewind. So probably where I should start is way back when I was introduced to Tim Glover at Bayside Church. My mother saw some of the really amazing things that he was doing for that church and put me in contact because I'd shown some keen interest. And Tim Glover was kind enough to take me in and show me the ropes and teach me a few things, and it really expanded quite rapidly from there. So I was given the opportunity as I think a 14-year-old child to do some editing for some small projects, and then within a couple of months, some pretty significant projects for the church, some creative and some rudimental, but it really laid the foundation for what I know today. Some of my opinions around video have really been formed from some of those really early years. So maybe for some more background there, Tim Glover and why that played such a pivotal role in probably grounding me and having a passion is his experience was mostly founded at the Mill. So if anyone's familiar with the director Ridley Scott, who's famous for, say, The Gladiator. So he has a production company called The Mill, whom Tim Glover gained a significant amount of experience. And so working under Tim Glover for a series of years was really important. And then Sid Polly as well, who played a pretty big role in that.
So for those who don't know who Sid Polly is, who's he?
So Sid Polly was one of the media directors for Hillsong Church for quite a many years, and then moved to Bayside and helped establish a very strong media department there from a broadcast point of view, which then allowed me to gain some broadcast-based experience, so move a little bit out of the post-production world and a little bit more into the live production for a broadcast standard. And then from there, Tim Smith, who had a very strong animation background and was well-educated across a series of different post-productions, came along as well. And I worked, and as of course yourself did, worked with Tim for many years, kind of shadowing him and learning a lot more about the post-production and animation side of things. So even before I kind of took on my first official role in any form of media agency, I actually had a very well-rounded understanding of a number of different facets of media. So it was it was a really interesting beginning to my journey, and all of that it came at no cost either. It was also a lot of it was done voluntary initially, and it was a good way to kind of learn some of the ropes with some very experienced people.
Yeah, so a lot of people, when they try to get into doing content creating or whatever, the end goal is to be paid and to have a job. And the common path is to go to university. Did you go to university?
No.
What are your thoughts on that?
Actually, some people might even judge me harshly for this, but I was, and I am and have always been very keen in music, and I finished my year 12 by doing 4 music courses at a tech school. And I was doing a media course, but the media course was getting in the way of me being able to spend time with my music. So I actually dropped it and ended up not doing any studies. So for me, my journey was very different in that it all began from a series of contacts and voluntary work, which is actually, it's pretty common amongst the church scene, having that volunteer avenue and getting that hands-on experience, which sometimes people in the university pathway don't really get as much of that kind of industry-based hands-on opportunities. So, but then again, even within church scenes, sometimes there's the ability to get stuck into a particular way of doing things. And so working in other industries after that was also very important to having a well-rounded understanding of media and content as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so 15 years ago, technology has come a long way. Do you remember what the first camera was that you picked up and started using?
I can't remember the very first one. I know it was some form of Betacam, and I think it was a Sony. The first camera I remember getting familiar with that I probably would have considered something for almost personal use was the Z100, which was at the time when it first came out seemed a little bit ahead of its time, but looking back on it now is pretty pathetic. So that was really interesting and kind of in hindsight, what was kind of available in a camera and where cameras have moved today, it's phenomenal to see what kind of features that people look for in a camera that was available then. So it was very much a production camera. It was so important that it had very compatible audio inputs, so phantom power capabilities, XLR inputs. And that it was compatible with systems, so like SDI outs, or actually I don't even think it was SDI at that point, but being able to have broadcast standard outputs and time code outputs, so many things that just aren't applicable for so many cameras today, because everything's ad lib. It's either for web or it's just never put into an environment where it needs to seamlessly sync up with something to run through a switcher. So that technology has developed massively since then.
So today, working at 77 Post, what kind of camera gear are you working with?
Currently, we're working with a few C100s and a 7D, which is our predominant B-roll camera, just because of its lightweight versatility. It's changed in the way that the quality is increased dramatically. As still relatively low-end cameras as far as high-end production goes, those cameras are now somewhat obsolete, and we ourselves are looking to upgrade. But if you kind of compare apples with apples, I think when there was a big push at some point for better quality sensors, better bit rates within cameras and better color depth. And I think the C100 made a really good, for its time, made a really good step in kind of taking high quality to a consumer, or at least mid-level consumer, which is why we started working with those. And they've been very, very good cameras up until now, really flexible capabilities, and I suppose lots of features that allow for a wide variety of situations, filming situations. Yeah, so indoors, outdoors, action or studio. So it's good in that regard, a very well-rounded production camera.
Some people might be shocked to hear that you're shooting with C100s in 2020. What's the thinking right now? What's keeping you still using that camera and not upgrading like yesterday or last week or a year ago? Because just run us through some of the capabilities of that camera. compared to what is available today?
Yeah, look, it's such a great question. As far as what we are required to film in production, so for those who are with us today, the kind of work we do is very much advertising, commercial. It's product and service focus, promoting businesses, mostly for web, although some does go to TV. And where we've really struggled to upgrade, sometimes budgetary. I mean, it'd be nice to be shooting on, Reds or
8K Reds,
or extremely high frame rate cameras. But every camera always has its pitfall, and up until now, it's been difficult to find a camera that ticks the broadest amount of boxes. And although there's obviously better versions of the C100 model, such as the C300, which shoots in 4K, would be the next step for us. The fact that it's got things like a movable screen on it, where you can tilt and see what you're shooting from different angles. The built-in ND filters, the EF mount is a big one for us, as all our lenses currently are EF. And probably being a full service production agency, having the native and versatile audio inputs is actually a really big thing. So not up until now, there's been lots of cameras that do individual tasks really well. So where your Panasonic GH4 or your AS7 or your 7D are really good for B-roll and kind of fast shooting. It's been hard to find a really holistic solution, and which is why we've been stuck with the C100 for so long.
Because the C100 that shoots, its maximum resolution is 1080p. So some people might hear that and think, well, why haven't you upgraded to 4K? Why haven't you upgraded to 4K? Because it's such a big thing. Like, you got to shoot in 4K. Yeah.
Look, the funny thing is I think now it's finally getting to a point where it's probably a necessity. I think more from a reframing flexibility than a delivery. Out of all our clients that we have, there's only really one of our clients that actually has requested to have 4K footage. And the other thing is...
you have more than like 5 clients or whatever. You've got many clients.
You've got dozens and dozens of clients.
So the fact that only one client has requested 4K...
It's not something that that clients have actually been asking for.
Interesting.
I know. And secondly to that is the consumer level of content. So if we were filming TV or cinema, it would be a no-brainer. But for commercial content that is going to TV doesn't broadcast in 4K, and also to web. Yes, you can put stuff on YouTube in 4K, but most internet connections can't really stream 4K via YouTube effectively. So most content people are viewing is 1080 or less. So we haven't up until now really had much of a requirement for that. So I think investing in a higher resolution camera really has to be something that's desired more so by the production company than the client, because at the end of the day, HD is still actually a suitable platform.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're shooting HD today with your C100s, but tomorrow or into the future, what's the next camera that you're hopefully looking at to invest in, and why?
Yeah, so one that's tickled our fancy the most is the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K. It's the next step up to the 4K, which had some further pitfalls to the 6K, which they've now amended. So for us, a big one was the native EF mount, amongst a few other technical things that they've added into the camera. For us, it ticks the vast majority of boxes that have been appeased previously by the C100. The biggest pitfall currently that we're trying to be addressing, and we were even chatting about earlier, is the fact that it hasn't got ND filters built in. And as a production company where we shoot in such a wide variety of environments, it's actually something that has to be addressed in some shape or form. And there are other options for other cameras. So there's a new C300 coming out, and there's plenty of other cameras that are coming out of that nature.
They're expensive.
But they unfortunately can't compete with the price of the Blackmagic camera. They've found a way to get a very broad amount of solutions, obviously not all the boxes, but a broad amount of solutions for almost a seventh of the price of the same camera. So for that price, you could probably find very reasonable solutions and workarounds to NDs for that extra $17,000. So it's a bit of a sacrifice, I suppose, you need to make.
One feature that comes to mind that the Blackmagic cameras don't have that the C300 Mark III does have, and most Canon cameras, is autofocus. What do you think about autofocus?
I'm not a fan. Each to their own. I suppose maybe over the years doing so much manual work and seeing autofocus fail so much in the past, I've just learnt to trust my own eye over technology. Now, I know that's not necessarily the case these days. I believe your cameras today might very well be running autofocus.
Well, right now we're shooting the wide shot with a Panasonic S1, which is notoriously known for bad autofocus. So you better believe we're shooting manual right now. And the Panasonic EVA 1, which is Campbell's close-up shot, that does have autofocus, but it's a one-push autofocus. It's not continuous. So right now we're running on manual focus, and hopefully we are in focus. If we're not, Nathan's going to be very angry later at past Nathan. But yes, I digress.
I mean, there's only so much you can fix in post, right?
Out of focus shots, you really can't save that much. I've had that experience in the past, but not today.
All been there.
Yeah, we've all been.
We did some vigorous testing beforehand.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, does it work?
I mean, long story short, look, I'm sure the technology's come a long way. It's the run and gun stuff. I think you can still find good solutions. There are some, even the C100 doesn't run that feature. The 7D does, and that's our real run and gun camera. So we're in, for example, running a form of gimbal or stabilization, and we don't have the ability of focusing on the lens. That camera does actually pick that up for us. I suppose in most studio situations, if you haven't got time to set your focus, you probably need to be looking at another solution for a camera anyway. So I suppose there's going to be that compromise, of course. I think the technology is certainly interesting. Like you said, there's a lot of different variants in the success of the technology. And for me, it's not been something that I've looked out for because it's not something that I've greatly trusted up until now.
Because there is a stigma with it, and I've heard many people talk about this, like trust your own eye, manually focus. If it's out of focus, you've only got yourself to blame. And there's been so many times where you try to trust the autofocus, you've got a critical shot you need to get, and you don't get it because it's out of focus. So I've had that experience and I can relate to that. But from a lot of the examples that I'm seeing online today, like you can trust Canon's dual pixel autofocus. It is the holy grail of autofocus. And even apparently Sony is good as well. But I haven't had that first-hand experience. I'm very interested in it to see how well it works. But I think personally that autofocus going into the future, depending on how big your crew is, like if you're a one-man or one person filming production house, whatever, then you don't have a focus puller. You don't have extra people that can be focused just on focusing. You're doing a whole bunch of things. You're monitoring the audio. You're making sure that it's exposed correctly. You're doing a whole bunch of things to then have focus removed from one of the things that you've got to be paying attention to. That's really handy.
Yeah, it can certainly from a production point of view, if you're running by yourself or just being fast and loose, there's certainly some value in the technology if you can trust it.
And that's a big if.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I suppose it just comes down to I think it's even one of your mantras. It's just there's no such thing as the perfect camera. You'd be wild in this, even in this day and age, to run a set for a film and run autofocus. You just wouldn't. You'd have like I said, a dedicated focus pull. You got a whole team to working this stuff out, measuring the distance, and then and rehearsing your shots and pulling your focus. And that's just something that at the end of the scale, the technology exists, and even though it may be perfect, it's still
Close to.
It's still a long way off being used in top end productions, because I think it's still may, even at the top end of the spectrum, has that stigma, which will probably hang around for some time because it failed for so long.
Yeah, bad memories of it. So we've talked about cameras. What other gear that assists your camera is there that you really like using? Like what features or even pieces of equipment? So like audio, lighting in your day-to-day shooting environment.
Yeah. There's always a lot of gear that I don't have that I would like, and I think anyone that works in any form of production can agree with that. You're always looking at different bits and pieces that would make your life a lot easier, or you feel that it would improve your production. But I think a good operator learns to get the best with what they've got, and you always need to be conscious of what you can get to improve. Really, really important factors are making sure you have great quality audio, which I see that you've got sorted with some very high quality condenser mics, and also knowing the right gear for the situation. You wouldn't use one of these out in the field, is also pivotally or is equally important. So you can have the best mic in the world, not that exists, but you could have a very high quality mic, and if you're using it in the wrong situation, you're actually not getting the most out of it. Same with lighting. If you're outdoors and you actually just need a reflector, not punching in more light, then it's having that understanding of the use case of each piece of gear, which is far more important than the gear itself. It's the use case. For me, running, we've got a series of LED lights that we use, and I think that suits our production. It would be nice in many cases to have tungsten lighting because of the skin tones. I think it is far more complementary. There's things that you really compromise, however, when you move in that direction, is that if you shoot indoors, your room warms up way too quick. Sometimes your talent can get hot and sweaty under those lights. You risk burning objects.
Yep.
So
in there.
Yeah. So Nathan and I, were on a production once where we left a tungsten light on the floor to create a gleaming effect under the door and burnt the carpet. So that was a lesson well learned. So running LEDs has really been positive for us for its lightweight capabilities. It's they don't draw a massive amount of power, so you can run multiple lights off one power port. They have a lot of versatility in terms of turning up light and down. Whereas with a tungsten light, usually you have to blind the light or diffuse it. And with LEDs or even fluorescent lights, the ability to kind of scale the amount of light is pretty important. But most of all, the fact that it doesn't warm up and it's not hot to touch, you can pack it up straight away once it's done.
Yeah, that is very good.
Yeah,
that was one thing that I really didn't like at the end of the shoot. You finish shooting and you would start to pack up your gear, and then it's still really hot. And unfortunately, I wouldn't have gloves on me or whatever, although I should have. You just have to wait for it to cool down.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And I think it's probably been for mid to small scale commercial productions, LED lighting and fluorescent lighting has been an absolute blessing for that ability. And just being able to condense them, we've got a series of 6 banks and 4 banks fluorescent lights, which are about that deep, and you can stack 4 of them up and they're only like that high. So they're really space saving from that point of view, and they're really light, so you can put them quite high. Not that I would recommend it, but you can put put them up without shot bags, which I can see a couple of your backlights are set up, and they don't require any sandbags, which is, again, another big kind of load that in the past you would have had to ensure that you had with you, which weighs you down.
It all adds up.
Yeah, it all adds up. And look, everything for every shoot. So if you're shooting on a really high-end production with really high-end cameras, and you need that beautiful skin tone that you're going to get from that tungsten light, then you make that investment to make that happen, or you hire it out where necessary. But I think depending on your production, you really need to make the decision as to what's going to benefit you.
Yeah, so we've talked about pros and cons of gear. At the end of the day, does gear matter? Like, what you have, does it really matter? What is your thoughts on that statement or question? Sorry.
To some extent, I think the most important thing you can do as a filmmaker or producer is fundamentally to create content that people are actually going to want to watch. And you can have the best camera in the world, but if you can't direct your talent or you can't tell a good story, and no one's going to watch it, then what's the point of having the good gear? So I think there's some fundamentals you really need to have in place first. Gear can, in some scenarios, make or break a production. So being able to correctly light a scene can make or break a production. If your audio is inaudible and people can't hear what you're saying, in that scenario, it makes or breaks a production. I mean, some of those things are very basic, but you'd be surprised the amount of people that go out on a shoot and they record. The levels are too low and therefore there's too much noise. And in that scenario, it's really hard to engage with the content because you're focused on something else other than the story. Or if a shot is incorrectly lit and it's overexposed, or too dark for any particular reason, and it looks wrong, and that distraction often takes away from the viewer engagement. And so having that expertise on how to run the gear, in my opinion, is a far more beneficial skill to have than having a larger inventory of gear.
And to learn how to use your gear, what do you do? Do you just go out and shoot? Do you go on YouTube and just look at tutorials? Do you, heaven forbid, read the manual? Like, what is it that you do to get the best out of your gear?
You know what? It's a really interesting question because the position that I sit in now as a producer, I've gone through the ranks and I've had a lot of experience across a lot of different industries and learn a lot. I've worked in live sound, live visuals with projection, which gives you another understanding of types of lighting, working lighting for broadcasts and even for live stage. I think it's one of the really big challenges for your solo operators is that they unfortunately need to have the understanding of multiple roles. And that is truly a tricky thing. So if you're a cameraman and you want to go out and you want to do a job for a client, you're a freelancer, you're not expected just to be a cameraman. You're also expected to be an expert in audio and make sure you have clean sound and lighting, and also be a good producer, being able to direct your talent. So when you're a smaller scale production, unfortunately, it's necessary that you are a bit of a Swiss Army knife. And as you kind of grow and the production grows and the team grows, or depending on the kind of production you're doing, that's where speciality comes in. And in that scenario, I think it's what I suppose makes your question really interesting is that how do you actually learn to use that gear? So I think that really needs to be dictated by, firstly, what you want to do. So if you want to be a focus puller, which I wanted to be for the longest period of time, that was my dream. I just wanted to be on a set and I just wanted to pull focus. You would study that. You would
at university.
Well, so maybe that's half the reason why I'm not a focus puller. I mean, there's certain avenues like film school to get certain accolades to do certain things, but there's also other ways around it. I mean, I'm sitting where I am today because of the experience I've had, and also from the people that I've met along the way that have given me, thankfully, the opportunity. But I think that if you're looking at starting out, if you're at the other end of the spectrum and you're looking at getting off the ground and you've just bought a camera and you're like, okay, well, I want to do a shoot, but how do I do audio? How do I do lighting? There is actually an incredible amount of information around the internet.
Free information.
A helpful podcast like this, which is really, really beneficial to help getting people to the next stage, but practice makes perfect at the end of the day. So it's really good to have a solid understanding of certain elements. So the more you can educate yourself is really beneficial. So with audio, it's understanding, what type of mic is correct for the type of situation, and understanding the pattern of the mic and how it picks up vocals and how you position a mic on a person to pick up different tones or remove sibilance. And lighting, learning different lighting setups. There's so much you can learn about lighting setups for different scenarios and the effect it has. As a camera operator, learning about the technical specifications of the camera and how to get the best out of it. What do I need to do to get a shallow or a wider depth of field? I don't want to just have the nose in focus. I want the whole face.
Or at least the eyes.
Or at least the eyes. I think it's really important to learn and know your stuff, and that's what will help you to get a really solid production in a number of scenarios, and not to get so thrown out in the deep end. With production, there's no silver bullet because at the end of the day, it's a creative thing. So knowing your stuff and knowing how to achieve certain looks is really important in that regards.
I'll just make the podcast all about me right now, just for a moment. I took a different path into getting into video production. I went to university and I don't regret it. This was I graduated in 2007. This was pre DSLR revolution and YouTube blowing up and having all these things readily available to teach you how to become a filmmaker, how to produce content. So I went to university, and one of the things that I really valued about it was you could network. But these days, if someone comes to me and says, hey, which university should I go to for video production? I would actually caution them and say, how about instead of going into a whole bunch of debt to get a piece of paper, you invest in yourself with gear, start shooting, create a show reel, a portfolio, start working, start getting paid, and you can bypass university. I don't regret my path, but today, if I was to do it if I was to do it again, and I refer to my degree as a piece of paper, and that is essentially what it is, but that piece of paper does represent a lot of learning, but I've learned so much more since graduating than what I did learn.
It's the hands on the tools.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the most important pivoting moments in my career was the first real job that I had outside of my volunteer work, where I worked as a cameraman for the horse races, and that role was particularly important in developing a real fundamental understanding of how the camera actually operates under different circumstances. So that's the way the horses are filmed actually requires a high level of skill and understanding from what will happen, what is the reaction of different circumstances when you're filming. The horses run around the track, so you need to learn tracking. You need to learn to zoom while you're tracking to make sure that things are correctly framed while it's moving, which is one aspect that a lot of people in static scenarios wouldn't really get that grasp on. Having an understanding that when you zoom in, less light gets into the camera and therefore your depth of field is shallower, and so you actually need to track your focus when you're tighter. So actually learning to track your focus on a moving object and zooming at the same time, it's challenging. And for me, I went from being an operator who could set up a camera to being within a few months a camera operator that would happily and confidently run a camera in nearly any circumstance, because there was different. There was through the job there was handheld operation for handheld interviews. There was shooting at night, which required an understanding of shutter speed and how that affected your focus, and working with different frame rates as well. Being able to collaborate with CCU operators to have an understanding of what you needed to do to work with them when they had to increase their exposure, your depth of field became shallow, so you needed to track your focus more than you would normally. And that path for me, actually getting my hands on the tools and being put in a really challenging situation, took me from being a junior to a very, very confident and competent operator in a very short amount of time. And I think it's interesting because although that role that I got wasn't voluntary, and it's probably a task I would have never been able to do on a voluntary basis because of the professional nature of it, I would have never had that opportunity had I not learnt the foundational skills through the voluntary work that I did. Now, your path, like you say, was completely different. So you were given an amazing opportunity, and almost directly as a result of your studies, which is a completely different path to mine.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think what you're saying is I can agree to some extent. There's a lot of self-investment that can happen to advance yourself so much these days. Learning, getting a good understanding. But I probably have to go back to what I was saying before, is that practice makes perfect. Unless you're actually getting out, you're doing stuff, you're using the tools and you're using them in different scenarios, you're not going to really understand what the result of the work is until you kind of road test your own abilities.
Yeah. So we've heard where you've come from, where you are today. Where do you see your career as a content creator, video producer? What would you call yourself?
Yeah, definitely a producer now.
Where do you see that going in the future? Do you see yourself remaining as a producer, or do you see yourself evolving and moving to something different?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think, so for a little bit of context, 77 Productions is now, it's partnered with a digital marketing agency. And again, in my journey has been another pivoting point to from simply creating content to appease a client's needs, to moving to a place where I have an understanding of purpose-driven content and how to create content that people will engage with. Working with a digital marketing agency means that you create content for specific purposes and in specific scenarios. So one thing that broke my brain when I was really trying to adapt to this new way of thinking about how I create video is the same kind of content that you create for YouTube, for example, a skippable ad, will be different to the same kind of content that you need to create for social. And people might be thinking, well, why is that different? They're both online. They're both pretty quick content. YouTube, you go in with the understanding that 99% of the time people have their sound turned on because they go to YouTube to watch something and potentially engage with it. And in that scenario, you can create content and utilize the audio aspect of that video to help engage your audience. Whereas on social, 99% of the time sound isn't on and people will just scroll past it. So the way you connect with that viewer is completely different. It needs to be bold visually, and that's how you capture people's attention. And then additionally to that, it's learning about your audience. That is incredibly important, because if what you're creating is irrelevant to your target audience, people aren't likely to connect with it at all. One other thing that I've learned recently is that through engaging content, there's a level of authenticity that is always required to really, truly connect. And if not authenticity, it's humor or something memorable, some form of story. And that's what I love what you're doing here, is that people connect with stories and that authenticity. or it's got to be something that's memorable. It's invoked an emotion. So you think about any really pivotal marketing campaign over the however, like just think of the most memorable that comes to your head. It either made you laugh or chuckle. It was funny for some reason, or it was quirky, or it was sad, or it was hard hitting. But either way, it evoked an emotion, and that's why you remember it, and that's what makes that marketing campaign special. So having that understanding and not just creating content for the sake of creating content. If a client comes and says, I want this, being able to work with them to understand the why is really, really important. To answer your question, where I see myself going from here, I have fallen in love with the producing aspect, and I think it's not really so much a move away now, but an area of growth. So working with in more challenging situations with potentially bigger clients to create more memorable campaigns is something I'm really interested in doing in. Just as of late, we've been working with companies to create engaging content where the companies have been open to our suggestions, and then that has really driven me into a new area of passion where I've been able to kind of conceptualize with the team to come up with video content that people will come across and actually connect with rather than slam that skip button. And I think that's really, in this day and age, because there's so much content, it's so easy to do.
Yeah. You got to capture people's attention. If you don't get their attention, you've lost. Like, there's no point.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing all that with us today, Campbell. To finish off this episode, if you could give one piece of advice to someone that's starting out in content creating, video producing, whatever, what would it be?
Oh, one piece of advice. Don't be afraid to fail. Yeah. I've had hundreds of ideas over the years that have been rejected, and that's okay. It doesn't necessarily mean that you were wrong, and it also doesn't mean that the client was right. But I think there will come a time where your creative idea sees the light of day, and it'll make you really proud. And I think it's important not to get disheartened. So I would say don't be afraid to fail, put your ideas out there, and don't get offended when it gets rejected.
Great words to finish on. Thank you very much, Campbell.
Yeah, you're welcome, Nathan, anytime.